Israel released footage of what it says are weapons and military equipment inside the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza. The largest hospital in Gaza was raided, essentially, by Israeli forces as part of their ground operation, and it was a major operation. In the video, IDF Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus can be seen touring what remains of the building and pointing to apparent piles of Hamas weapons.
I'll show you what our troops exposed just minutes ago. In military terms, this is a grab bag, grab and go of a Hamas combatant. And if you zoom in and we get some light over here, what you will be able to see is military equipment. There is an AK-47, there are cartridges, ammo, there are grenades in here, of course uniform, and all of this was hidden very conveniently, secretly behind the MRI machine.
Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus spent 40 hours in Gaza. He has returned to Tel Aviv now and joins us live. Thanks so much for your time. I think it's an even more febrile environment than it was last week and the week before when we spoke to you, Jonathan. The evidence that you provided there, that you saw, you touched with your own hands, what does it prove? Does it prove that Hamas uses hospitals like Al-Shifa as a place to store weapons, or does it prove that they are actual command centres?
Well, if we want to, first of all, hello, good morning, and thank you for having me again on the show. If we want to be very specific, then I think we can safely say that what we have found so far proves that Hamas uses the hospitals for non-hospital purposes. What we're going to prove by exposing the underground tunnels that we have started tapping into, and by exploring the perimeter of the area and really getting into the deep underground of the hospital, then we will be able to prove that Hamas really uses this hospital as a command and control position, and really much more than just storing weapons and having combatants there. We know that they used it on October 7th. We know that they brought Israeli hostages there. We know that the area is rife with Hamas operatives carrying weapons and patrolling the area and controlling the hospital. But at this stage, what we can prove is that they're using it not like a hospital, and in the future, we will prove more.
Okay, but do you accept that this is still used as a legitimate hospital, that there are babies and sick people there that need treatment? And are those doctors, do you put them in the same category as Hamas sympathisers, or are they separate?
Not at all. This is a functioning hospital above ground, and it has Hamas components in it, and underground Hamas infrastructure. So since there are real patients there, then of course they need to be treated like civilian non-combatants. And I just want to emphasize, when we took the hospital and when our troops got in, not a single Palestinian was wounded. And you can check me on that. Even the Palestinians didn't claim that anybody was wounded.
No, but what about the babies?
Yeah, and
what happened with the babies?
The babies, I am happy to say that thanks to Egyptian intervention and a joint operation with the Palestinian Red Crescent, the IDF, and the Egyptians, all of the babies that were there, 32 in number, have been evacuated safely from that hospital to another Gazan hospital in southern Gaza. They were evacuated through incubators that we, the IDF, provided. I know so because I was on the ground when we provided part of those incubators as well.
So none of those premature babies died, because at the time we were getting mixed reports that they had to be taken off oxygen because there were power outages. Is that not true?
That is not true, and there was a convoy of ambulances, Red Crescent ambulances, that made its way through a humanitarian corridor that we facilitated from Shifa in northern Gaza towards southern Gaza. And the report that I have, which I know is confirmed also with the Egyptians, is that they have arrived safely at the hospital in southern Gaza, all of the babies that left the Shifa hospital.
Having been there now, Jonathan, on the ground and seen for yourself, do you accept that there is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza?
I accept that the picture is a very ugly one, and I accept that there is human suffering, and I accept that the conditions on the ground are definitely not convenient, and in some places they're harsh. And I also want to say that we are doing a lot in order to ameliorate that situation and to distinguish between combatants and non-combatants, and to provide aid to civilians that are there, and to provide medical care and attention to those who need it. I don't know, it's a difficult term to say if there's a crisis. I wouldn't want to be there as a civilian, and I'm happy that I'm not there and my family isn't there. But then on the other hand, these people have had more than 3 weeks to evacuate from the area, and they could be in relative safety, not in comfort, but in relative safety in southern Gaza, had they listened to our warnings.
There was some talk over the weekend of a ceasefire, some kind of deal to get hostages out of there. What happened to that? How many more people are going to have to die before you get hostages back and there is some kind of compromise here?
Yeah, we definitely wish that nobody would need to die, and that all of our hostages, all of the 238 remaining hostages that have been held for 45 days, including babies, women, children, and elderly, that they'd be returned immediately. Unfortunately, what we've been able to rescue from the Gaza Strip are bodies of dead Israelis, which is the sad reality, but we are committed to getting all of them back home. And I am aware of reports, including statements made by President Biden and others, that we're getting closer, etc. Unfortunately, being experienced with Hamas on the ground, we know that we can only trust the things that we can see with our own eyes, not statements and not commitments made by them.
Okay, the families of Israeli hostages, you would have seen as well, are getting quite emotional, more than they have been over the last month, and they are getting frustrated with your government. Now, this is perhaps for a government spokesperson to answer, but I want your perspective on this, because the families of these Israeli hostages are blaming the government for failing to do a deal. Does that motivate the government? Do you see from your end that you can see that now, at this stage in the conflict, you're closer to needing to do a deal to get hostages back?
Yes, I can only imagine their pain and the suffering that they've been going through the last 45 days. And I think that those families are carrying themselves so nobly in their quest to return their loved ones. The IDF has tremendous motivation and is doing everything it can on the ground, constantly seeking the enemy, constantly seeking friction and creating new intelligence, interrogating Hamas operatives on the ground, specifically with the purpose of bringing anybody back to Israel, all of the hostages back. And unfortunately, we've been able to get back bodies, and we'll see what the government will be able to facilitate through some kind of negotiations. But I think it's important to keep in mind that the fact that we are on the ground applying pressure on Hamas, and that they feel the pressure of the presence of our ground forces and everything that is part of the presence of the ground forces, is very important for the success of any future deal. This could all end, the human suffering in Gaza and the ordeal that Israeli families are going through could end very quickly if Hamas decides to surrender and to give up the hostages. That would be a great solution, and then we could go on building a much better future for Israel and for Gaza. Sadly, Hamas are in control, and they are not giving up the hostages, and they continue to fight, and so will we.
Jonathan, if I may, we've been talking for the better part of 6 weeks, almost on a weekly basis. And this morning, as I talk to you, I feel like I can detect a change in tone from you, having been into Gaza, seeing the suffering in there, but also the weight of the families of these hostages that are just desperate to have some news of their loved ones. What is it? How do you feel at this point in the conflict?
The people in Israel, they have gone through quite an ordeal. We're still coming to terms with the results of the massacre of the 7th of October. And the stories are endless, of the rape and violence and mutilations and the atrocities that are just, they're very difficult to get through, even though it's been a month and a half, a busy month and a half. And as time goes by, you listen to the families that are now, been waiting for their loved ones to return for 45 days, and you cannot feel anything but compassion for them. I try to feel their pain and understand their pain. And when I was on the ground with our special forces last week inside Shifa, uh, they feel it as well. And we spoke about it as we were waiting to go into the hospital and photograph the weapons that Hamas had brought in there. We spoke exactly about that. And their number one desire of these special forces that were there from the Air Force Special Unit was, let's go find hostages. Let's do everything we can in order to find a clue which will lead us to the next which will lead us to the next exposure, and then will enable us to get our hostages home and to give some kind of solace and comfort for at least one family.
Yeah, indeed. There's some 15 to 20,000 civilians, it's estimated, that have been killed in Gaza as well. And every time that we speak, Jonathan, we talk about those hostages. And now Israel has been on the ground in Gaza for, almost 3 weeks, and still it's 238. That number has not come down in any significant way, has it?
Unfortunately not. And we are hard at work. We have been able to extract successfully only one of the hostages alive, and the rest, sadly, are the bodies and remains of other Israelis that we've been able to locate and then bring back, at least for proper Jewish burial. But I agree, that isn't enough, and more needs to be done in order to get our hostages home. This situation is a situation that, of course, we didn't want. The 7th of October was forced upon us. We are responding to it. I think that Israel is under attack, not only in Gaza, but along the northern border. The Houthis in Yemen are aspiring to destabilize the situation there, trying to attack international trade and shipping routes. And I'm sure that the Iranians are watching from afar and happy with what they're seeing so far.
Jonathan, we'll speak soon. Thanks so much for your time as always.
Thank you.